You changed my life. You know, it's funny you just talked about that, but you changed my life the moment that you gave me permission to say, hey, listen, when you look at your life, Noah, as a portfolio, you're an entrepreneur that happens to do some art. For 28 years, I defined myself and my life's mission of I need to be and I have to be an artist. Mm-hmm. I came from a survival mentality with the upbringing of our split of our family's home and being an entrepreneur very young. But my definition of who I was, my identity, came from the idea of you're this guy that can do some art, you're very gifted at it, now make a living at it, and it has to work because you don't have any other options.
Right.
Football was in play back then in terms of an idea when I was coming out of high school. The other side of that was music. So touring with a band, playing football, or doing art and making money. There was the idea that if calling for me back then meant I'm just going to do something I love. Mm-hmm. That was, hey, you found your calling. But you can be doing something that you love and not having any impact. You know what I'm saying? So the fruit of doing something that you love has to be impactful, because you can be doing something that you love and you're making a ton of money and you're just like going, which I did, and you're like, this has there's no meaning in this. It's shallow.
Right. It's so simple, but it's so complex. And great wisdom is always reduced to simplicity so we can get it. Mm-hmm. But there's a complexity behind the scenes that drives it. Do I need to love it for it to be calling? Yes. Does the fact that I love it make it calling? No.
Right.
Because I have to bring two other things into play. One, am I able to take my best skill sets, the toolbox of my talents, the immense uniqueness of my story? As older I get, the more complex and individualized my story becomes. Mm-hmm. How do I take all of that into the place where my passion resides? If I don't get the leverage of my story and my talents behind it, mm-hmm. it's not going to be my greatest impact. And then I have to ask, what's the measurement of success look like? That's where purpose comes into play. Because I can have temporary measures that are great. If I don't have some eternal metric that says that eternity is different because of what I've done today, then I'm playing a short-term game that says making the first down is more important than winning the game with touchdowns.
Totally. Let's make this super practical. We talked about it at lunch. Everybody's measuring stick for what is not just successful, but prosperity. How can we sum that up for what we talked about? Because it really boils down to, like, we were doing comparing to where you're going, okay, somebody's over here, they're being extremely successful, and God is an option in their brand in terms of the way that they present it. You have others that are unapologetic about being successful, but is based on ministry. I say forget how it's being done and really look at the why it's being done and how is it going to be measured. Because that really is the filter. And you said it, you're saying my conviction is basically, I want to look at if my life, at the end of my life, if God's currency is souls, how many people are sitting in heaven as a result of my effort and my calling? Can my calling basically be the currency of it, God's currency? Because really that's all that's going to matter, right? So, I mean, unpack that really quick. I mean, this gets me pumped.
The story I hate is a story that I have to come back to. It's the rich young ruler. He must have been important in the story because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all pick up on his story and insert them into the life of Jesus that they wrote. Not many things make 3 out of 4 of the Gospels. Even Christmas only made Matthew and Luke. So,
we got to write that one down, man.
Here's the rich young ruler, and he shows up, and he's rich, he's young, and he's in charge. He's living the prosperity story, and he's got it all. And he comes to Jesus and says, what am I missing here? How can I get to heaven? And Jesus said, be perfect. And this guy was so self-complimentary as to say, I'm already there because I've kept the law perfectly since my youth. Well, you could argue that immediately and say no one has kept the law perfectly, but Jesus didn't argue that. He looked at me and said, one thing you lack. Now stop right there. Here's a guy who's rich, he's young, he's in charge.
Yeah.
What's he lacking?
Yep.
Well, what he was lacking was a sense that he had figured it out. The reason he came with the questions is because he hadn't figured it out yet. Here we are in, I think, month 15 of the Masters Online experience. Friends, you wouldn't be with us if you'd figured it out. The only reason somebody is in these conversations with us is because their life to this point says, there's something I'm missing, I've got to get the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
And that's what this man who already had nailed it in terms of every metric he had. He was rich, he was in charge, and he wasn't old, he was young. I mean, we'd put him on the cover of the magazine. And he comes and says, I'm missing something. So, Noah, here's the point. What are we missing? And what he was missing was an opportunity to do something that really mattered. And Jesus said, here's the one thing you lack. Sell what you have, give the money to the poor, then you'll have treasure in heaven, and then you come and follow me. Well, here's what Jesus basically was saying to him. You've got abundance beyond what it takes to keep your business going. Now, in that era, the economy was based on agriculture, and agriculture was passed generation to generation within family systems. So Jesus didn't tell this guy to go sell everything and become poor and penniless. What he told him was sell the abundance beyond the operating capital, the over and above part.
That's where a lot of people get it wrong.
He couldn't sell his farm because it didn't belong to him, it belonged to the family. He didn't tell him to get rid of the seed corn for the next season because operating capital is a necessary holding for anybody in terms of their lives and their sustenance. What he told him was the excess that you've retained for your own purposes, put it where it really belongs, into God's program, and then free yourself up, because this guy wasn't having to work for a living because he had people who were doing the working for him. His time was available if he wanted to put it there. Well, you know where he was putting his time? Increasing his abundance rather than increasing his involvement in the things that would measure as abundant later. You sell what you have, give the money to the poor, then you'll have treasure in heaven. Come and follow me. And the man walked away because he didn't trust God with heaven. He trusted himself with earth, but he didn't trust God with heaven. Boy, Noah, that story goes across 2,000 years into my life and into your life, because the question, the over and above part, beyond my workday, beyond what it takes to sustain my family commitments, where will my time and attention go? If I create capacity beyond that, will I invest in things that pay off here, or will I invest in things that pay off there? Will calling get the excess beyond my career life, or will I create a career life that consumes everything and doesn't have anything left over to point toward heaven?